Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for an amazing morning. We had some fantastic sessions. If you're just joining us online, welcome. If you weren't here this morning, my name is Lindsey Gumb. I use she, her pronouns. I am the fellow for open education with the New England Board of Higher Ed. And I am also an associate professor and the scholarly communications librarian at Roger Williams University, which is in beautiful Rhode Island. So this morning we had the pleasure of hearing from Nicole Allen, who helped us understand kind of the behind the scenes of the publishing industry, which is really crucial to understand where we as educators and administrators fit into this situation and where we can best leverage our influence. She also helped us kind of set the stage for what OER is, right? It's that free plus permissions piece. So it's a little nuanced difference from like free library resources, which as a librarian, I still adore. I think there's so much value in those, but they are different. Then we had an incredible student panel facilitated by the amazing Dr. Bob Awkward and our wonderful student participants. I was telling folks it really was the best student panel I've ever attended and very powerful. I really want to say thank you for your being so vulnerable and brave and sharing your experiences. It makes all the difference. And of course, our wonderful keynotes, Rajiv Jangjiani and Camille Gentles-Pert, they really, challenge us to critically examine the entire educational system and moving forward from ameliorative to transformative action is really key in our next step together as a community. But maybe you've been finding yourself wanting to see some more specific examples of OER adoption at the institution system or state level, or this concept of open pedagogy. What does it look like in practice and in play? And how does OER, how does OER impact our student performance or other metrics like retention? So in this session, I will be, it's not going to be as great as the student panel or the keynote, I'm sorry, or Nicole's, but it's going to be a little drier, but still so crucial in helping us kind of use theoretical frameworks and research to move this work forward, because that's an important component of this. So I'm going to take you kind of on a walking tour of the Northeast, sharing some local exemplars from the 6 New England states. And so all of that will kind of be in the larger context of, like I mentioned, some theoretical frameworks and research data that us academics crave. So you'll hear a few of the same studies mentioned that I think Nicole mentioned a few, Rajiv, and our students even touched on some of them. But I think it's important, I'm not going to remove those slides. I think it's important you hear them again. And I hope I can give you some inspiration that will help set the stage for our last 2 sessions of our action plan workshop and the roundtable discussions. Okay, so I found this op-ed from a university student. She's studying at UMass Dartmouth. Actually, she just graduated, but it really moved me. She said, every new semester of college came with a dreaded activity. I had to find and rent the textbooks I needed for my classes. During this time, I would see the strain on my mother's face. I already owed loans to a school that no longer exists, now Ida College. So I'm sure all around the country we're seeing this too, but particularly in the Northeast, colleges and universities are closing at a really rapid rate. I couldn't put any more stress on my family's finances. So this op-ed, like I mentioned, was written by Alyssa Buffington at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and it really demonstrates some of the financial stresses not only our students, but their families encounter while trying to attain a post-secondary degree in the United States. But amidst her own stressors, the student shows some extreme empathy for her peers who don't have the financial support that she does have. And she continues on to say, but what is my struggle compared to a student receiving C's when they should get A's, all because they don't have the required textbook, right? And we've already heard today how textbook costs do negatively impact student behavior and their academic progress, but I wanted to put these numbers on the board because I'm a visual person too. So we've heard that 36% of students earned a poor grade because they didn't have access to the textbook. 43% of students took fewer courses, and 23% dropped a course. So for you administrators in the room who are worried about retention and drawing students to your institutions, these are really important things to think about. You might not think hello?
You're muted on the Zoom.
I'm supposed to be muted because the mic is feeding into the system. All good again, Tricia says. Can we just confirm that, please?
Delay on that.
Sound is back again on the Zoom. Fantastic. Sorry, everyone. Oh, man. Okay. So let me just find my place. Okay, so I was basically trying to explain that these textbook costs are negatively impacting our students. And so the last slide was from the Florida Virtual Campus Study that they did in 2016, again in 2018. You good?
This is saying disconnecting, trying to reconnect the little control panel for the thing. So I'm going to get Joe again.
Okay, I'm going to keep going until someone complains in the chat. So anyway, so this is the Florida Virtual Campus Study, but there have been other studies that have shown this as well. So in 2021, a study conducted by the US Public Interest Group Education Fund found that 21% of students actually skip purchasing an access code because of the prohibitive cost. Forgoing an access code means students miss out on homework, quizzes, and other important parts of their grade. In particular, this study found that 30% of students without reliable internet skipped buying an access code. And of the nearly 600 students in this particular study that reported missing meals due to COVID-19, 82% of those students reported also skipped buying an access code, which was nearly twice the rate as their food secure peers. All right, so all of these conversations we're having today, I think Camille said it best, like we have to serve the students with the most need, and that helps all of us. That helps all students. So launched by the Achieving the Dream in 2016, the OER degree initiative, which I think Nicole touched on this morning, sought to promote affordability and innovation at community colleges by supporting large-scale OER adoption. Over the 2.5 years, the initiative supported 38 community colleges across 13 states in building degree pathways using only OER instructional materials. A later research study done on these institutions that participated found 53% of students reported being unable to purchase required materials for at least one course, and our Pell students and other underrepresented minorities experience this at higher rates. And so the studies I just reviewed demonstrate that many students are choosing not to purchase textbooks that are outside of their financial means, but how else are students dealing with the costs? So the Florida Virtual Campus study, again, showed that 66% are buying books from a source other than the campus bookstore, often Amazon or another third-party seller. Like Nicole, I remember going on eBay back in the day to look for textbooks, and when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, eBay. 53% are buying used copies from the campus bookstore, usually at a lower price. 48% are opting to rent a physical copy, and 41% are choosing to rent a digital version. But if we consider the distinguishing characteristics of OER, the licensing structures that do allow for the reuse and retention of these materials in perpetuity, these last two statistics are actually really alarming, particularly in the last few years of such monumental disruption and uncertainty in the personal lives of our students. So students are experiencing higher levels of mental health crises, food, housing, and transportation insecurities. And let's not forget our adult learners who might be lacking quality childcare and affordable childcare in this country, or have suddenly found themselves as the caregivers to aging parent or loved ones. Disruption happens, right? And students need to withdraw from courses for any number of reasons. What we don't always consider, particularly in the textbook rental market, which Nicole touched on a little bit this morning, is that the materials need to be returned, right? Students have to give them back. But if they have to drop out for whatever reason, particularly in the last 2 years, they have to repurchase those materials, right? So the 5 Rs don't pertain to these students. They can't take advantage of them. They're essentially paying for the materials twice, canceling out any savings from the rental price. If we think about our students who are purchasing a used copy from the bookstore or another source like Amazon, students are often unaware that the access codes expire, right? So those access codes they need to get the homework and the quizzes and other ancillary materials, those codes expire at the end of the semester typically. And so if you're buying a used copy, you're not getting the access code, right? And so students who are trying to save money by doing that are actually disadvantaged even further. And there are, options to purchase just the access code, but of course that's another added cost. So they have no option but to purchase the access code if they want to participate and earn that portion of their grade, right? And when we start to consider financial aid playing into this equation, we need to be extra critical. The Florida survey found that only 23% of students state that financial aid covered all of their textbooks. That means that 3/4 of our students who depend on financial aid to gain access to their learning materials aren't able to fully utilize the cost, and that's really significant. Financial aid often comes in weeks after the semester starts, or for veterans, it can take months. I've actually talked to veterans on our campus who have had a really hard time getting their financial aid. Dan's shaking his head because he's the registrar at my university. He knows. So those delays directly affect our students' ability to participate and excel in their learning. However, initial studies are starting to show us that OER not only has the ability to alleviate these access barriers, but in doing so attributes to improving student academic performance. So courses that adopted OER have demonstrated a significant decrease in withdrawal rate, a relatively lower failure rate, and no obvious change in D grade rate. Studies have also shown, I know Rajiv and Nicole kind of mentioned this study before, but it's really one of my favorite ones to point to. OER improve end of course grades and decrease DFW, which stands for the W's, the withdrawal letter grades, rates for all students, right? We're talking about all students. It's going to benefit all of our students. They also improve course grades at greater rates and decrease DFW rates at greater rates for our Pell recipient students, our part-time students, and populations historically underserved by higher education. And this is huge. So these are the charts from that Colvard study. So you can see that students enrolled in courses that utilize OER had higher GPAs, all students, but particularly our non-white students. And additionally, students enrolled in courses using OER experienced lower DFW rates, particularly for our non-white students. And this one shows the data for our Pell students. So likewise, the same held true for all students of financial means, but even more so for our Pell eligible students. And if we look at the throughput rate of students, which is an aggregate of drop rates, withdrawal rates, and C or better rates, studies have found that students who use OER perform significantly better on the course throughput rate than their peers who use traditional textbooks in both face-to-face and online courses that utilize OER. So again, that goes back to what our student Yorgo had brought up about the access hypothesis. And here in New England, so here's where I'm going to start kind of integrating some local examples into these broader studies. The Connecticut OER Legislative Report, the 2021 one, demonstrates that 79% of students enrolled in over 60 course sections supported by the state's OER grant program earned a grade of C or better. Nationally, students enrolled in OER courses have higher credit loads than those enrolled in non-OER courses, which is significant. And I'm going to send out the links to all these studies at the end. And continuing on to look at enrollment intensity, in one study, 42% of students who saved money with OER said they actually reinvested those funds back into their institutions, which is really interesting. So they either did that by paying their tuition bill or enrolling in more classes. So if we start to think about like needing some reasons for administrators to be like, hey, OER is not such a bad thing, like these studies are huge. Another study suggests that students who took multiple OER courses on average earn more college credits over time than otherwise similar students who took no OER courses. And studies have found that students taking OER courses made faster progress towards degrees than their peers who took no OER courses. And I know Michael mentioned that this morning in his opening remarks, that time is of the enemy in higher education, right? We want our students to get in and progress forward because the longer they need to step away, the harder and harder it is to reach that completion. And as we start to consider how to make our open education efforts both attainable and sustainable, that's huge, return on investment is a crucial element to consider. So at Tidewater Community College, OER decreased drop rates and the reduction in refunds to students, which represented a renewable new source of funds for the institution to reinvest back into their OER programs. So that's a question we get all the time in this community, is like, how is this sustainable? Like, we need to pay our faculty to do this work, right? We can't just do it unfunded, but there are ways to reinvest those funds that they come back to you. So it's kind of like this great cycle. Similarly, the Achieving the Dream study found that an average of $1.03 in gross revenue was generated for every dollar spent, including program and additional delivery costs, which was a modest 3% institutional return on investment. And that reflects an average net financial benefit of $38,000 for those institutions. In layman's terms, the student savings generated by OER degrees did not come at a cost to the colleges, which is really exciting. Back in Connecticut, the Connecticut Open Educational Resources Coordinating Council, say that 7 times fast, was established, and it's a 17-member standing body representing faculty, staff, administrators, and students from the Connecticut state colleges and universities, the University of Connecticut, and Connecticut's independent institutions, along with administrative support. And Nicole mentioned before, that's huge that Connecticut is working together with its public and independent systems. We don't see that happening a lot. We often see independent institutions falling behind in this work because they kind of think that's not our problem. We don't have those students, but in fact, we all know that that's not true. So I really, commend Connecticut doing this work. And the report found that across the first 2 years, Over 3,800 students have benefited from benefits related to the grant work across a minimum of 165 course sections, resulting in over or almost $500,000 in savings. And that was representative 4 times return on investment, which is incredible. I'll be sending out their legislative report too. Thank you, Kevin, for compiling that. And yep. And Zach, hi Zach, nice to meet you. It's really, it was delightful to read and really inspiring. Made me jealous to be in Rhode Island. And in New Hampshire, Plymouth State University, Robin, woo woo, has been, yeah, sure, yeah. They've been instrumental in acting as a state, regional, and national champion for OER. Nicole showed us this morning the open anthology, which comes out of Plymouth State. It's used often in our community as an exemplar, and it's been reproduced and adapted all over. Its open learning and teaching collaborative has been instrumental in supporting faculty in adopting, adapting, and authoring OER, centering the pedagogical benefits of OER while simultaneously recognizing the financial benefits to its students. And to date, the institution boasts $1.5 million saved for students in textbook costs. And the CoLab's director, Robin DeRosa, who's with us today and who will be giving us some lovely closing remarks. She's been instrumental in challenging the open education community to reach beyond this cost savings narrative in the use of the static free textbook. So we'll hear later from her today. Very excited. So if we go to my state, Rhode Island, and my co-chair, my state co-chair, Dragan, was here earlier, but she had to leave. In 2016, the governor issued a challenge to all of the state's institutions of higher ed to work together to save its students $5 million in 5 years using openly licensed textbooks. And actually, Nicole Allen was instrumental in getting this off the ground in our state. And still helping us get data years later. While the adoption and use of OER has varied widely between the public and independent institutions, the state ultimately has met its goal, even though data collection is not complete. And COVID happened, so we haven't written our final report yet, but it's been a really successful collaboration between the independents and public institutions. Although unlike Connecticut, Rhode Island, only the public institutions receive funding to do this work. So the independents joined, and we had to fight tooth and nail to get some money from our presidents, but we did it. But I've been talking a lot about financials, and we've already discussed today that OER does not stop at free textbooks, right? And we do want to still continue to celebrate these savings because it's still a very real barrier for our students. But we need to acknowledge that it's not just about the savings. So I wanted to highlight one of my students who just graduated this past May. And this testimonial from Sam really, to me, he was like, I hate it when my faculty members teach to the textbook. It's not it doesn't reflect the learning outcomes in the syllabus. Like Marcella was saying this morning, it's just, there's too much there. It's overwhelming. It's not all used. You can easily get lost in it. But OER allows our educators to teach to the learning outcomes, right? And not to the text. And so Sam says, as someone who entered Introduction to Sociology 2 weeks late, so he had been enrolled in a course, dropped it, and then picked up this course. It benefited me to have access to Dr. Rothschild's adaptation of the OpenStax online textbook free of charge. I was able to save money in terms of not having to buy a physical textbook again after having dropped a different course. Having access to the course textbook right from my computer improved my learning experience in Intro to Sociology. It set me up for success, knowing that all of the material in the textbook would be covered, since it was specifically designed for Dr. Rothschild's course. And in case you're wondering if students notice what percentage of the textbook faculty use, the answer is they notice and they really care. Critical information literacy scholar April Hathcock emphasizes that we should work towards gathering intellectual work from the margins, right? We want to feel comfortable citing examples from Grandma Ma and Miss Peachy down the street, even as others cite the wisdom from Althusser or Marx. And I'll argue that we should even add, include our students' lived experiences into that mix too. And this is exactly what Massachusetts is doing with their Rotel grant. Bob, what does that stand for?
Sue?
Sue? Remixing. Oh. Look at me, I got it on the screen. So Rotel stands for Remixing Open Textbooks Through an Equity Lens. And so they received a grant from the US Department of Education to do this work, almost $500,000, right?
Actually, it's 1.4 million.
Oh, no way.
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years, okay. And so there's 6 Massachusetts institutions that are working together along with the Massachusetts Department of Higher Ed, and they are looking to test the hypothesis that underrepresented students will achieve higher academic outcomes if free, culturally relevant textbooks are available to them. So the project will pay stipends to its faculty to create new OER or adapt and remix existing OER content through an equity lens. The team will pilot this project in the 6 public colleges and universities and evaluate student success outcomes. This is really exciting, right? Congrats, Massachusetts. I don't know what happened there, but I can read my notes. So the Rotel grant and similar work should remind us that OER has value, right? We all know that, but it can also lead to the exploitation of knowledge producers. It can reinforce a Western-centric perspective that leads to forms of educational colonialism and violence. It can confuse autonomy for liberty and can privilege a neoliberal formulation of education that precludes real social change. This comes from Nora Almeida. She is at CUNY, I believe. Yeah, CUNY. And so that's a nice segue into this example that comes from Dr. Amy Clenard. Thanks for introducing me, Bob. She's at Bunker Hill Community College here in Massachusetts. And I saw her present at something that Sue was running. I don't remember what it was, but it was recently. Yeah. We're always on different calls, but anyway, I was really, this example really moved me. So she teaches, she's an education faculty member at Bunker Hill Community College, and she found that the traditional textbook she was using had a predominantly Western outlook that didn't reflect the background and values of the majority of her students enrolled in her courses. The commercial textbook focused only on Western measures of parenting based on samples of white, European, and American families. The OER version had a far more inclusive perspective. But even if it hadn't, we could adapt it, right? It's OER, we could make those changes. We've heard a lot from our friends at MIT today, but they're also looking to, I think we know, or a lot of us probably know, they're arguably one of the pioneers of OER. But they're looking to develop new equity-focused collaborations with educators to create use and share more culturally relevant adaptations of its content. And Krishna shared that this morning with us. So I'm really excited to see, where that goes and how your collaboration with Tennessee State works out. Yes. We can help you there. So our 2021 Community of Practice brought together 8 regional faculty members. So this was part of our Hewlett work that we did as a part of this grant. So we had a Community of Practice, 8 regional faculty members, and we wanted to challenge them to refresh their fundamental knowledge of OER. So all of these faculty members had used OER in their classrooms before, and we wanted to help them work towards a deeper understanding of utilizing open educational practices to increase student engagement, success, and ownership of the cultural content present in their learning materials. Right, so this is where we start to invite our students into the content creation and revision process. So I'm going to highlight 3 of our faculty members that did some work. They all did excellent work. but I don't have all day. So Dr. Suzanne Marmo, who is an assistant professor of social work at Sacred Heart University, she participated in our community of practice last year and instituted in her course a project where students were asked to research the evidence of structural racism in their areas of practice. And as part of her project with our community of practice, her students prepared web pages that will be updated each year as a renewable assignment, allowing new students to learn from their predecessors and to build upon that knowledge for students who come after them. So I think that term's been thrown out a few times today, that concept of like a renewable assignment, something that because of the licensing structure can be adapted and built upon. Another participant, Dr. Kathleen Bernegar, is an associate professor of education at the University of Vermont, and she's committed to a research agenda that promotes equity and cultural responsiveness by honoring the experiences of young adolescents with marginalized identities. She's particularly interested in OER as a vehicle for equity, both in decreasing the cost of education and in enacting culturally responsive and humanizing pedagogies. This past year, her students had the opportunity to openly license artifacts they created on various topics, for example, practices to support young adolescents. And when I share out all the materials from this session, I have a link to a really great example that one of her students created. It blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is awesome, created by a student, and it's openly licensed. So a new student can come and take it and make it even better. This is another one of our fellows, Dr. Dan Leland, who unfortunately was exposed to COVID, so he's not able to be here today, but really wanted to come. He's a business professor at Thomas College, which is an independent institution in Maine. And Dr. Leland and the entire Thomas College community, including their provost, Tom Edwards, has been working tirelessly on transitioning their courses to OER with the support of the Davis Foundation. So if anyone is looking to get grants to do this work, the Davis Foundation is a fantastic option to look into. So this was Dan's first attempt. So he had used OER in the past. He had transitioned basically all of his courses to OER, but this was his first attempt at using open educational practices in his diversity in the workplace business course. And students were able to examine topics such as structural racism in the workplace and create openly licensed artifacts that could be built upon by future students. And like Dan says in his quote, students get the sense that they are participants and have ownership in the class. If we talk about engagement, this is a huge piece. We wanted to know, though, how the students enrolled in these courses taught by our faculty members in this community of practice. We wanted to know how they felt about contributing their voice. So we did a survey last fall at all these different institutions. So these institutions represent where the faculty members were teaching in our community of practice. So we examined student understandings of renewable assignments versus traditional assignments using theoretical frameworks such as representational justice from Lambert. I'm going to butcher this name, but Pekrin's Achievement Emotions Questionnaire, and Black and Desi's Perceived Autonomy Support. And for those of you who might not know, again, renewable assignments are those in which students are invited to create something and then openly license it. So our students own their intellectual property, right? So that's an option that they have to share it with others, but we respect student agency. So in this research study, students were not forced to share if they didn't want to. It was an option. So I'll just quickly share some of our findings from the research, which is almost published. So our study found that renewable assignments had higher levels of reported interest, enjoyment, perceived choice, perceived competence, relatedness, and pride than traditional assignments. So when I say traditional assignments, I mean something like a research paper, something that's just a transaction between the instructor and the student, right? Student hands it to you, you grade it, and you give it back, right? It kind of ends there. And so traditional assignments had higher levels of reported pressure, Overall, the findings indicate more intrinsic motivation for renewable assignments than traditional assignments. And so my research partner in this, Dr. Virginia Clinton LaSalle, apologizes she could not be here today, but I believe she's on the call. We also found that students had more positive reactions to renewable versus traditional assignments, feeling like their voice mattered. People like them could see themselves reflected in the assignment. They could share their ideas from their unique perspectives and experiences, and they felt their contributions had value. They also felt free to express themselves in the assignment. Representational justice is equitable opportunities for self-expression by historically underserved and marginalized people. Okay, measures of representational justice was developed for this study for both renewable and traditional assignments. So I just explained which was which, right? The renewable is an assignment that students create and they can opt to openly license and share so other students can build upon it. And then the traditional is that more standard transaction between the faculty member and the student. And so as you can see from the graph, students perceive notably higher representational justice with renewable versus traditional assignments. We can attribute this to the open licensing structure of OER that allows materials to be adapted and customized for and by our students. Those who chose to license their work into an OER felt a stronger sense of representational justice. So we looked at differences in perceived representational justice in the renewable assignment for those who publicly shared and those who did not. I'm not sharing everything, but those were like some of the really good findings that we found. So what else did we find? We had like an open-ended, what else did they want to share? And they expressed, it was a great idea, and I got to discuss BIPOC folks in the work that I do since there was a lack of representation in the literature. I consider my traditional assignments important to myself and my teacher. However, this renewable assignment transcends a focus on myself for learning to how my product will interact with my peers and the world, right? So stepping beyond the walls of the classroom. This topic was something I never understood and never took the time to actually learn it. But after this assignment, I understand it completely and am able to apply it outside of class. So all of this means nothing without your support as administrators and leaders in this community. OER is free for our students, but it is certainly not free to create. It's not free to maintain. It takes a lot of time and effort to thoughtfully craft OER. It takes a lot of time and effort to scaffold this work for our students so we can invite them into the process ethically and legally, really. And faculty need and deserve your support to do this work with and for our students. And this support might manifest in the form of mini grants. It might manifest in course releases or in the recognition in the tenure and promotion process. And ideally, I would say all three. And so I'm going to end it there. And I think this is a good time to just say that, reiterate what Michael said this morning. Like, Nebby wants to know how we can help. Where we can support you in this work. So I always, hope that you might reach out to me via email. Our website has some really great content. So recordings from this session will live there, so you can access the wonderful keynote and the student panel. We have great resources from Spark on our website. And we're always willing to just help and consult and help you think through, institutionally, what might this look like? So we can help you scale and support this work. Do we have any questions?
I do audience Q&A with the microphone.
Sure. Tanya,
Yeah,
can you wait until we get you the microphone? Thanks.
Test one.
I'm actually holding an email to you right now. So there's a lot of conversation about student mental health on campuses, and if you go back to one of your findings, I thought it was really interesting that students felt, it was like one of your first ones, this one. They reported interest, enjoyment, perceived choice, perceived competence, relatedness, and pride. And I think that there's a connection here with how we're teaching and how students deal with the contrast really is traditional assignments had higher levels of reported pressure, which translates into a lot of mental health issues, problems, and anxiety, stress. I mean, there's a ton going on right now about traditional grading, how it's not working, how we need more ungrading practices or some other way. So I really think that what you've done here is kind of it's really a toe dip into the water of what this could mean in terms of student mental health crisis, and how OER and open pedagogy might play a part in relieving some of that for our students.
Absolutely.
I'd love to see a lot more.
Krishna. No, that's fine.
So let me ask two questions, and the question in both cases is, from your research, what are you hearing? So the first one is, 2001 must have been an amazing year, because Creative Commons was founded, OCW was founded, and so was Wikipedia, all in the same year. And we haven't mentioned Wikipedia. Completely open, all Creative Commons licensed, created in a shared way, collaboratively, and incredibly valuable for all of us, I think. I'm sure we all use it. So Wikipedia as an element of OER, I'm curious what your research is showing. That's my second question. Second question, so that to me is a very positive question. Second question to me is more thorny. So if I think about OCW right now, we get 2 million visits to our website every month, which is great, but we get about 10 million minutes of video watching on our YouTube channel every month. We have 5 million YouTube subscribers. There's no question that our videos are being used very, very extensively. It's hard to compare because you don't know how long people spend on our website, but very, very extensively. And they are open. They are Creative Commons licensed. They can be remixed, but very few people do. Okay. So it's the openness is not being exercised enough when it comes to video. Even harder is our interactive, auto-graded online problems. We have those out there for the world to use on what we call our open learning library. But in no practical sense are they remixable, because to run them, you need to have your own instance. It's all open source. In principle, you can stand up your own OpenEdX instance. You can run them too. It's in principle true, but in practice,
staff to do that,
but
right?
in practice, it's not. So for the more, video and then interactive online problems, if 2025 is going to be like 2001, where there's something amazing that starts, I think it will be something that makes things like video, more technologically demanding things that are being shared openly, but are not truly open in the sense of they're not practically remixable. They're not being remixed. And so I'm curious, from your research, what are you seeing either about Wikipedia being used or about what I see as a big challenge?
Sure. So I think if we start with Wikipedia, as a librarian, I'm seeing a lot of faculty wanting to engage their students in editing articles and adding articles on underrepresented areas of whatever in their scholarly circles. And I think I also every day have faculty come and say, I would love to use this video and remix it. Can you help me do that? No, I can't help you do that. We don't have the staff to do that, but that kind of deters people because it's open and I should be able to do that. And that's what I want to do. So that's just my own personal anecdotes. Rajiv, do you want to respond to that?
I'll just follow up on that, and I'll have a question for you with that. I mean, the Wiki Education Foundation has done a substantial amount of research that they've published, even in peer-reviewed journals, that show some of the impact of Wikipedia classroom assignments and things. But I think my partial answer to Krishna's question is really a question for you as well. Is I think one of the things we've seen is the importance not just of open licensing, but of technical openness, and in particular then of community-owned open infrastructure. And so one of the things we've been working on in BC and other places is this question of how can we make this truly sustainable, not in terms of, you need to subscribe to this private platform that can be walled in, where terms can be changed, where prices can be hiked. No, how can this be sustainable on a technical basis? And so, whether it's interactive applications using H5P technology, whether it's Pressbooks, of course, in terms of the open source software, but in a way that can actually functionally be driven by community. So my question back to you is, in New England, is there an active conversation? Ought there to be an active conversation, not just about supporting the resources, but the pipelines and infrastructure that it's built on and flows through? Because I know I've seen in other jurisdictions, Ontario is a good example, where they've created that kind of a sandbox where from any institution in the province, people are able to play and do what they need to without fear of this work being sucked away or it suddenly being unsustainable or unpredictable.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the question about open edtech infrastructure.
I don't think I'm aware of any infrastructure that exists, and anyone feel free to pipe up. But Kevin, I know you and I have had these conversations. I know the infrastructure group that Nicole and Angela DeBarger has pulled together to have these exact conversations. I missed the last meeting, so I don't know if you want to share anything that might have come up or any brainstorms or wishes that we have.
Looking at Nicole to see if I get the dirty look from your mother on what I can and can't say. No, I mean, one of the threads, obviously we want to make sure that there's infrastructure, like to your point, Rajiv, that isn't dependent on a publisher, that is open and can allow, but there's a support network that's needed. So there's infrastructure, there's maintenance, what have you. And some of the conversation is, how can we look to collaborative models like BC Campus, which is more of a co-op, and replicate that? But also, how do we take, perhaps advantage is the wrong word, but provide benefit for students who are in computer science programs or engineering programs? And how can we have those work towards a community goal so that the students are working towards filling their resume and actively seeing something that they can point to as a living, breathing application? And that also benefits the open community, but there's still so much more conversation to go.
Kevin, would you mind just sharing quickly about, I know it's not active anymore, but I know in Connecticut, you had that kind of like librarian like chat thing, but it was statewide and anyone could ask like an OER question. And it was really awesome. And we don't have anything like that, but like something like that, I feel like needs to exist.
Well, I'll start off by saying that Kevin Costner lied. Just because you build it doesn't mean they will come, but across our 17 institutions, we had an agreement from our librarians that they would man a chat feature that was embedded into our SpringShare library LibGuide system. And so there were folks who were volunteering their time across X number of days of the week to do this. And faculty preferred to work with their local librarian, somebody they knew, versus somebody who was happened to be available. What it's evolved to is now it's a back channel conversation for librarians to communicate, to help one another versus forward facing, helping faculty.
Interesting. Awesome. Krishna.
So I'll ask Debbie to do something.
Where's Michael?
Speaking on behalf of the community, but. So Open edX could have been this.
Yeah.
Okay, it's open source, but it isn't. When edX, and I think the reason it isn't is that it's open source in the sense of licenses and in permissions, but the ecosystem never developed because the Open edX code and technology was controlled by edX, which was at the same time the keeper of the code and the largest user, and they focused on the things they wanted to do. And in a real healthy open source ecosystem, you have hundreds and hundreds of users all adding things that achieve, related intersecting goals, but it benefits from the inputs from 100 directions. And Open edX has not had that. Yeah. But now it can, because although I very strongly disagreed with the decision of MIT and Harvard to sell edX to 2U, the one good thing about that is it separated edX from the Open edX
Yeah.
code. And so the Open edX code is now kept by a nonprofit, which is just getting started. Their chief technical officer has just been appointed. And I would love it for that new nonprofit to hear from the OER community that there's an opportunity for Open edX to really become the platform that is open, not only by permission and legality, but benefiting from inputs from all over the place. The sandbox that you were asked about, it certainly is not that today, but it could be, and it's now actually in the hands of a nonprofit that could choose to go in that direction. So I would urge NEBI to push.
We could chat offline.
And I know the CTO.
I just wanted to quickly bring it back to Lindsey's research and talk about what a fantastic job you did to really bring out the subtleties of open pedagogy and how it really had an intrinsic effect on students, and the amazing work that you've done here in New England, bringing people together in this great space, and wanted to just say thank you for doing that. If there, right, because it's really about the work that you've led here, and we're so grateful for that. So what do you think, if you were going to sum up the research that you've done and the work at NEBI, what do you think is the essential essence of the work that you've led at NEBI along with Stafford and the other staff here in this region?
Yeah, well, first I just want to bring up my research partner, Virginia, again. She created all of the measures of this study. She did most of the work. So she's not here, but I really need to say, give her props. But yeah, I think the essence, Tanya, is, with this grant, we've worked really hard to help our faculty in this region make that leap from using OER in the classroom to how do I take the OER that was okay and probably causing educational violence, right, in ways that we don't even know? How do I get to that step where I'm confident and understand how to adapt it and how to bring my students ethically into that process? That's what we've really been pushing in this region. So that's what I'm proud of. I think the research demonstrates that. And I think that's where I kind of want to continue to push with. Yeah.